honor, duty, death. These are the core tenets of our prestigious ranks. You shall be honorable in all that you do. You shall do your duty to the best of your abilities. You shall deal in only death on the battlefield. For we hold for the core. We hold for Ostengrad. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. What exactly their role is, and just how insanely overpowered these guys really are. In the next episode, we'll be covering the Cyratin Royal Fleet, as I don't think we're going to have enough time, but I guess we'll find out. We might do both in the same episode. Regardless, though, who are the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, and what is their job? The Cyratin Royal Vanguard is the personal defense force of the core fortress world, Ostengrad, and they are perhaps some of the most overpowered non-super soldiers that the Cyratin Empire has at their disposal, being nearly on par with Cyratin Marines. Now, when I get into the exact genetic modifications that these guys undergo, you may be questioning as to why they aren't considered as super soldier, but we'll get to that later. The Cyratin Royal Vanguard is comprised of not only infantry, but various different war vehicles, war machine, and his own dedicated fleet, this being the Royal Fleet. Now, it should be noted that the Royal Vanguard is a completely separate branch of the military compared to the Cyratin Royal Army. The two are not the same. In fact, the skill level between the Cyratin Royal Army and that of the Vanguard are vastly different. Same goes with the Royal Fleet. The Royal Fleet is not technically a part of the Cyratin military's main fleet, whether that be any assault, patrol, or death fleet that's going around, any planetary defense fleet, or even the Holy Armada itself. It is its own autonomous entity with the sole task of protecting Ostengrad. Now, if I had to compare these guys to a 40k equivalent, I would say that they are essentially the prestige and skill of 40k's Lucifer Blacks, as well as the sheer equipment quality of the Adeptus Custodians. Now, let me explain that. First of all, I haven't done a lot of research into the Astra Militarum, let alone the Lucifer Blacks, but from my understanding, the Lucifer Blacks are essentially the personal defense army, shall we say, of Holy Terra. They're oftentimes given out to various different dignitaries, especially the High Lords of Terra themselves. Supposedly, they're some of the most skilled and elite soldiers of the Astra Militarum, or in the Imperium of Man in general. And as a result, they are considered to be incredibly prestigious. Now, I don't know if this is actually true. Like I said, I've done very little. The majority of my knowledge on the Lucifer Blacks actually comes from the War of the Beast series for 40k. That being said, they're considered to be some of the most highly trained soldiers out there. The Cyratin Royal Vanguard is much in the same vein, only the Royal Vanguard doesn't sit idly on Ostengrad. Their primary objective is protecting Ostengrad. However, they are drilled day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Every single day that they are a member of the Royal Vanguard, they get up in the morning and they do training drills all the way until lunch, and they go again at training drills all the way till dinner, and then after that they have a recreation period and it's straight off to bed and getting ready for the next morning. 6 out of the 7 days in the week, they are doing your standard training drills that you would expect, ensuring that they have physical fitness, ensuring that their accuracy doesn't decrease, as well as various different CQC training, that being close quarters combat training. However, once per week, members of the Royal Vanguard will be given a special training regiment, and this is specifically a quote-unquote specialization training. You see, within the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, there aren't specialists. There aren't people who specialize in using war vehicles, or those who specialize in utilizing artillery, or the logistics corps, or anything like that. This is due to the fact that, although this sounds absolutely insane, the Cyratin Royal Vanguard soldiers are expected to be able to fulfill any role at any time in any position. This means that if the crew that is manning the artillery ends up getting killed off, any nearby soldiers have the necessary training and the necessary efficiency to take over for them, whether they be killed or incapacitated, to ensure that whatever offensive is currently going on remains at optimal efficiency. Now, like I said, this sounds completely and utterly insane. You're saying that every single one of these soldiers is a machine gunner, a artillery crew, a medic, a person who can use various different war vehicles, a sniper, recon, all of these different things, even pilots. And the answer is yes, but you have to realize where the Royal Vanguard is stationed. They're stationed on Ostengrad, the very final fortress world of the Cyratin Empire. If anything gets to Ostengrad, the Cyratin Empire needs the absolute best of the best to ensure that it holds, that it remains defended. And as a result, they're forced to do, frankly, ridiculous amounts of training in order to ensure that this level of efficiency remains. That being said, the Cyratin Royal Vanguard doesn't exclusively stay on Ostengrad. In periods of time in which the safety of Ostengrad and the core system seems pretty solid, we don't think that there's going to be a random attack anytime soon, the Royal Vanguard will periodically be sent out to a specific war zone of whatever their commanding officer decides to choose, and at that point they assist. And oh boy, when they get onto the battlefield, do they assist. Now, let's get into their equipment, because their equipment is absolutely insane. Each and every single member of the Cyratin Royal Vanguard utilizes an exosuit. Now, we've talked about these before. Exoskeleton, exosuit, and power armor. What are the differences? An exoskeleton is essentially a set of hydraulics or pneumatics or whatever have you that form the shape of a skeleton, oftentimes attached to the back and the backs of each limbs. They're basically load-bearing equipment. They're designed to increase the overall physical capabilities of the soldier, but they don't provide any defensive capabilities whatsoever. An exosuit, on the other hand, is essentially an exoskeleton that has been given a large amount of armor plating. It's still an exoskeleton in the middle of it all, but it has armor plating and it's designed to be very protective while also being very maneuverable. Having extra armor plating, having extra protection without largely any loss of motor functions. This is specifically what the Cyratin Marines utilize, as well as the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. It's very rare for members of the Cyratin Royal Army to be seen in these types of things, although it should be stated that Cyratin Royal Army members, it's not uncommon for them to be seen wearing exoskeletons. Finally, there is power armor, and you can essentially equivalent power armor in Shattered Legacies, or at least in the Cyratin Empire, to the Adeptus Astartes Terminator plate. This is ultra-heavy armor with built-in servos, hydraulics, and pneumatics. It's not just an exoskeleton with armor plastered on. You can think of it kind of like Fallout power armor or Astartes Terminator armor. It is incredibly thick, it's incredibly bulky, it can handle an insane amount of weight, but again, it's very bulky, it's very cumbersome. You're not going to be moving around very quickly with it, you lose a lot of mobility with it, but you're a walking, talking tank at that point, capable of taking unrealistic amounts of damage. Now, the Cyratin Empire does this a little bit differently, as oftentimes power armor is big enough where soldiers that are already fully armored in, say, an exosuit can quite literally step in to the power armor without taking off the armor they're already wearing, allowing for 2 layers of armor. Now, granted, this doesn't add extra weight on top of an already insane amount of weight, but regardless. So, with that in mind, the Cyratin Royal Vanguard utilize exosuits, and these exosuits are absolutely insane. Now, remember when I had said, you may remember this, I had said that the Cyratin Empire doesn't have access to Solstite anymore. When I had said that, I specifically meant after the Ruin War. After the Ruin War, the Cyratin Empire loses access to Solstite. Whatever Solstite they still have, that's a finite supply. Before the Ruin War, however, Soltech Conglomerate is still active and they're still making Solstite, which is why this next bit of information is so insane. Cyratin Royal Vanguard soldiers are armored in 1/8 inch plate Solstite, or 1/8 inch Solstite plate. To put that in comparison, Cyratin Marines, which are already walking tanks, have 1/8 corrodium. Corrodium is essentially an inferior form of Solstite. Well, more like Solstite is a superior form of corrodium. Corrodium is natural, Solstite is synthetic, but it was designed to be a straight upgrade. It's the same thickness, but the level of durability and defense that Royal Vanguard members have far exceeds that of Cyratin Marines, meaning they can take an absurd amount of damage before they actually start getting injured from said damage. They have an absolutely ridiculous amount of armor. Not only this, but the systems are also incredibly advanced. Essentially anything that you would imagine a super soldier, especially something like an Astartes or a Cyratin Marine, to have as systems and various different support stuff in their armor, Cyratin Royal Vanguard have as well. They have a full HUD system. They have Blink Command, which is basically, the Astartes use this as well. I kind of stole the idea, I'm not going to lie. Where basically they'll look at a specific part in their helmet, their heads-up display, and they'll quite literally intentionally blink at it, and it can do various different things. Change their viewing mode, gather data on the battlefield, whatever have you. The armor is incredibly advanced and is capable of a whole hell of a lot. However, the Cyratin Royal Vanguard wield weapons that the Cyratin Empire largely isn't aware that it exists, and it's for good reason. You see, the standard armed forces of the Cyratin Empire are usually utilizing plasmite. Very rarely will they be using Solstite, and usually it's only the most elite forces that are using something like antimatter. Law enforcement largely utilizes pulse weaponry as well. The Cyratin Royal Vanguard is an exception. Almost nobody knows about the weapons that they use. The armor that they have is common knowledge, but that's perfectly okay, simply because the armor that they have is so absurd that it really doesn't matter if the enemies know about it or not. There's very little that they can do. The weapons, on the other hand, are a very close secret, only known by a select few groups. And these are specifically known as thermokinetic wave projectors. Now, thermokinetic wave projectors are an utterly bizarre science. Now, we have talked about before the absolute insanity that is the Cyratin Empire's technology. And there have been a few people who have pointed out that some of it doesn't seem really realistic or possible. But we need to remember, first of all, the Cyratin Empire is working on a playing field far superior to what modern humanity is in the real world. There's a possibility that they've discovered ways around the laws of physics that we haven't even thought of. Second of all, Shattered Legacies' laws of physics, laws of reality, laws of biology, all that good stuff is ever so slightly different from the real world, which is how some of this stuff is actually possible. Third of all, the Cyratin Empire have repeatedly and intentionally broken these laws to get around, well, these laws of physics, biology, and reality. As a result, they're capable of stuff that is quite literally impossible, but now possible. The reason I say this is because thermokinetic isn't really a thing. Thermokinetic does kind of exist, but not in the sense of what these weapons are. You see, what thermokinetic wave projectors are is it's a wave of thermal energy that is so dense, which doesn't really make sense considering how thermodynamics works, but it's thermal energy that is so dense inside of a containment field that when it hits anything, it almost has kinetic properties. Basically, when somebody is hit by one of these things, there is a heat wave just before the actual projectile, quote unquote, wave of the weapon. And this heat wave essentially will burn away anything that is not covered and protected. This means if you have exposed skin and it comes in contact with this heat wave ahead of the projectile, it's basically completely scorching the skin instantly, charring it basically to nothingness. After that, the actual projectile hits. And the projectile, it's essentially like, you can kind of think of it like a shotgun almost. You know, I'm trying to think of what the 40k equivalent is. Melta weapons, I guess. Probably, yeah. Probably Melta weapons. But anyway, they basically fire off this large, shall we say, disc of energy that is held in a containment field. When this hits something, it strikes with tremendous force. Enough to quite literally shatter the armor of most factions on impact. And then, of course, there's the secondary heat wave inside of the projectile itself, which will char anything that the initial ahead heat wave didn't get, shall we say. It's a truly horrific weapon. And the weapon is specifically designed to handle any situation. It comes as a normal carbine, but is capable of easily being modified into a shotgun design. Much shorter range, but significantly more deadly, a lot more thermal energy. That kinetic impact when it hits an enemy is essentially at this point explosive rather than just shattering. There are long-range alternatives similar to sniper rifles. The projectile itself has a much thicker containment field. The overall area that it covers is significantly smaller, capable of going incredibly vast distances. There's even variants that are capable of being fired rapidly for suppressing fire, although this typically has a massive drop in overall kinetic as well as thermal damage that is capable of doing. It is capable of basically doing anything on the battlefield save for explosives. As a result, the Cyratin Royal Army constantly keep various different attachments for these weapons to modify how the weapon fires on them at all times. And they don't take up a lot of room. Oftentimes, it's a very thin barrel that they can easily just strap onto the side of their leg, onto the side of their thigh, basically. And then the rest of them, you can just basically put them in the little pockets on like a plate carrier. They're very small. They are very quick to swap out. Not only this, but the weapon's energy cells, shall we say. Basically, it's ammunition canister. It holds a lot of energy inside of it, so it's capable of firing for a significant amount of time before even having to be reloaded. These weapons are literally designed to be as efficient as possible. But of course, what are these weapons called? Well, there's only two different variants. These are the Valsian Hell Rifle and the Ballador Hell Cannon. And the Hell Rifle is essentially what I just described. Very modular, capable of adapting to almost any situation, whereas the Ballador Hell Cannon is basically take the Astartes plasma cannon and instead of it being plasma, have it a thermokinetic wave projector. It's designed to basically melt through just about any fortification or, to be frank, any war vehicle or person that's in front of it, and anything that doesn't instantly get emoliated by the heat wave is likely going to be obliterated by the kinetic blast as a result, and then subsequently melted again. It's a hellish weapon that is oftentimes only used by a very, very finite number of soldiers. And this is one of the only situations where there are actual specialists amongst the Royal Vanguard. Now, I know that doesn't make sense. I just said earlier that they don't have specialists. They do technically. They're essentially soldiers that are specifically trained to handle the Balador Hell Cannon. You know, the Hell Cannon is very bulky, it's very difficult to use, it's very difficult to reload, but the level of destruction is capable of unleashing, especially if you're using it very tactically, it's a must-have on the battlefield. And as a result, soldiers that actually use it, they'll be specially trained on how to actually use this weapon and actually, quote-unquote, get good at using it, because it is a very difficult weapon to use. It's the only specialist that the Royal Vanguard has, though. And even then, I wouldn't necessarily call them a specialist. They're specialized in the fact that they know how to use this gun, but any Royal Vanguard soldier could pick this up and pretty much figure out how to use it. Now that we've gone over some of their equipment, let's actually get into specifically the types of people that are being essentially the people that the Cyratin Empire are looking for in order to be members of the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, as well as their genetic modifications. Now, within the Cyratin Empire, we've talked about this before, how there are various different ranks of nobility. And specifically, we're looking at the highest mid-ranking title of Kyr. Now, Kyr is a very, very important noble rank. And the reasoning for this is because when it comes to the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, and especially their augmentations, the younger the better. When we had talked about Mikhaila, we had said that the fetus inside of his mother, essentially Mikhaila, when he was still in that form, was injected with various different augmentations and DNA strands. The Cyratin Empire found this to be fascinating and decided to actually utilize it. And it's seen as a massive honor for a Kyr family to be chosen for this type of augmentation. So basically, the fetus or embryo is injected with modified, synthetically made DNA strands, and over the course of it growing, it will very slowly integrate these various different DNA strands to make naturally grown genetic alterations to the body. Now, it should be noted that these Kyr families essentially venerate the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. This is the job you want to do. This is honor and duty of the highest caliber. And whilst no child of a Kyr family is forced to join the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, the majority of them do. There are certainly outliers that choose not to join the Vanguard and pursue their own life, and even then it's still considered honorable simply because even with everything going for you, you still decide to choose an occupation that basically isn't handed to you on a golden platter. You know, that's still considered to be fairly honorable. That being said, the majority of time, the majority of children end up joining the Royal Vanguard. Now, not all of the augmentations are capable of being implemented via these DNA strands. There's a significant amount of them that can't be. However, there are certain augmentations that can be. Now, this next part, I actually had somebody in the community call me out for it. And I realized, whilst we were talking about it, that they were completely correct. And this person will immediately know who they are. When I was talking about Ostengrad, I had said that the Cyratin Empire chooses a random planet with specific geological formations as well as the composition of the atmosphere. And I had said the Cyratins are capable of breathing a multitude of different atmospheres, everything from oxygen, helium, argon, just to name a few. And it's specifically that last one, argon. I had specifically said that it's very toxic to humans. whilst that's not technically incorrect, it's not technically correct either. It's not very toxic to us, but it is, in a sense, toxic to us if we spend enough time in an argon-rich atmosphere, which is one of the reasons why you need something like a respirator or a filter, or even in rare cases in which the atmosphere is almost entirely argon and no other gases, you may have to have an actual gas mask and oxygen tanks or oxygen filters. And as a result, I had said that, this type of equipment is obviously very delicate. It's very easy to damage, at which point you're basically screwed unless you have a backup, because you do the math. But they had pointed out the fact that argon isn't naturally extremely toxic to humans. But we also need to remember that not only is the laws of physics and biology slightly different in Gender Legacies, but specifically for this first augmentation, the Cyratin Empire's understanding of biology, as well as the fact that they've broken the laws of biology multiple times, like the laws of physics and reality and so on and so forth, the Cyratin Empire are capable of things that, within modern medicine, is even a theoretical impossibility. So the first augmentation is specifically to the lungs, and the lungs essentially have multiple layers of what can best be described as filters inside of them. And they're capable of absorbing even incredibly minor traces of usable atmospheres. As a result, Cyratin Royal Vanguard soldiers are actually capable of going into almost any atmosphere indefinitely without having to go to an oxygen-rich pressurized chamber. The only exception to this being the truly most inhospitable atmospheres and gases out there. Otherwise, they're largely capable of comfortably surviving in almost any environment. The second augmentation is known as the Adrena Heart, and the Adrena Heart is absolutely insane. So the Adrena Heart is basically a normal human, or in this case, Cyratin heart, that has two sacs attached to it that are capable of dispensing what can best be described as combat drugs into the blood system. The first one is quite literally a incredibly potent concoction similar to pure adrenaline. And basically, when they first created this augmentation, when the soldier would enter combat, it would dump this pseudo-adrenaline throughout their entire system and basically just spike everything that they could do. It would spike their perception, their awareness, their physical strength, their overall agility. Like, anything that you can imagine was enhanced. Keep in mind, this isn't actually adrenaline. It's a chemical similar to it, synthetic, but this sac next to their heart is capable of producing it. And it lasts for around 4 hours. The problem is that it basically screws with their system, their entire body, and after that 4 hours is up, they crash, and they crash hard, essentially becoming completely immobilized. And what was happening is the Cyratin Empire would get into these long, drawn-out battles, and suddenly every single one of the Vanguard just drops like a rock. And they're like, okay. We need to find a way around this. It instantly activated when they enter battle. Obviously not the most ideal, because what happens is the body has natural threat responses. You know, when you get into a threatening or dangerous situation, your body automatically is already dumping adrenaline into your system. And the Adrena Heart basically utilizes this as a trigger or a marker to basically say, hey, we're obviously in a stressful situation. There's adrenaline going through the system. Dump this chemical concoction. We're ready to go. Let's fuck some shit up. And so they ended up creating a cybernetic implant. Very easy to install, and the use is rather interesting. It is a cybernetic implant that has essentially a cord going from the implant itself, which is located essentially at the valve of that adrenaline sac, and goes all the way into the palm of their hand where there's a button. This button specifically being in the pad of skin right at the base of the thumb, where the thumb connects to the actual palm of your hand. It's located in such a location that it's not an easy place to accidentally hit. Not only that, but it's fairly deep, so you have to use a lot of force to actually press the button and activate that adrenaline dump, or pseudo-adrenaline dump. And this was intentional. This way, the soldier can comfortably continue firing their weapon or using any melee weapon or even just straight up punching somebody if needs arise, and they won't accidentally activate this unless they absolutely need to, because like I said, it's a one-time use thing. It will regenerate eventually, but in the moment, it is a one-use thing. You have 4 hours, and if you don't get the job done in those 4 hours, you're out like a light. And so as a result, you either have to use your opposite hand and actually intentionally push the button, or what the Cyratin Empire did with some of the Royal Vanguard's weapons, their Hell Rifles, is they have this little very uncomfortable looking essentially shelf on the handle that intentionally protrudes out. It looks very uncomfortable, and it is very uncomfortable, but the purpose of it is that if they get into a dangerous situation and they can't really use their offhand to push the button, they can quite literally force the handle or that protrusion on the handle into the button and activate it essentially autonomously without having to actually interfere. The Cyratin Empire doesn't really use this anymore. In fact, they're actually going to a new method due to the fact that if your hand or arm gets cut off, suddenly you can't use that anymore. And that's a bit of a problem. They ended up, for some of the newer models, there's a little transmitter on it, and it is connected to, or it is synced to another implant located in the brain, and basically it's a thought impulse. Basically, you think, okay, I need that adrenaline dump. It sends a signal all the way to the location in your heart. It opens the valve and dumps the chemical concoction into your system. You got 4 hours. There you go. Of course, this still isn't a perfect solution due to the fact that psionic interference or even EMPs are capable of temporarily rendering them inoperable, but there's not really a surefire way of doing this without just not having the cybernetic augmentation in there to begin with. So after this, we have one final augmentation, which is just a general augmentation, and this is an overall strengthening of the musculature and skeletal systems. The muscles and bones have been strengthened, the bones are denser, the muscles are stronger, increasing the overall capabilities of the soldier as well as their overall durability. Now let's get into the post-birth augmentations. Should the child, or at this point, adolescent, decide that they wish to join the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, they will immediately be brought into the fold. Even as a child, the earliest cutoff is 12 years old, and they are brought into the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. They immediately start training. They start going through their basic drills. When they hit 18, they start going to the weekly specialist training, and they continue to train all the way up until they're officially brought into the fold as a full soldier. When they are 12 years old, they start getting, and they decide that they want to join the Vanguard, they start getting the rest of their augmentations. And it should be noted that unlike 40K, they are put under. In 40K, the augmentations process is wild. Like, you get no painkillers, you get no anesthetic. You are awake and fully conscious throughout every single one of the operations, just so that the apothecary can ensure you're not fucking dead yet. Like, if you're not laying there screaming because the literal space marine is rooting around in your chest cavity, you're basically dead and get the next aspirant, because this one is, yeah. Like, it's gruesome, but it's grim dark, and that's why it's awesome. But anyway. The first augmentation is various different strengthening and enhancements of internal organs, ensuring that everything has its durability increased, far less likelihood of having organs damaged or destroyed because of any injury that you sustain. Not only this, but a few very specific organs even have duplicates of them for redundancy. However, nowhere near on the same level as Cyratin Marines, let alone Astartes. The second augmentation is a chemical concoction that is introduced into the neurons in the brain and a specific organ that is incredibly small that produces this chemical at all times. And basically what it does is it increases their overall mental capacity, it increases their overall intelligence by a minor margin. It also increases their overall awareness and alertness at all times, whilst not really messing with their overall brain chemistry. As a result, incredibly potent, not really any downsides. The only downside is that they require a little bit more sleep than your normal person, but I mean, if they're essentially at full alert at all times, and that's just kind of their natural state, and the only side effect is that they need to sleep like an extra 2 hours, I'll take those odds, in all honesty. One of the most important augmentations is specifically to the entirety of the skin of the soldier. The skin has a special chemical injected into it, and there is a series of 6 injections across the entirety of the skin that they have to go through. What this does is it essentially strengthens their skin. It makes it ever so slightly imperceptibly thicker, whilst also making it significantly more durable. It should be noted that this is not the same as Cyratin Marines, which have essentially like a corrodium dust coating in their skin as well as their bones. This is not the same thing. That being said, whatever chemicals and processes that occur within the skin, it makes them virtually bulletproof at this point, save for some of the highest caliber rounds, such as an anti-material, but small arms and even some of the smaller mid-arms, they largely won't be able to penetrate through the skin anymore, and this specific part is on a soldier-by-soldier basis. They actually have... how do I want to explain it? Almost an energy resistance. They're not immune to energy weapons. Enough plasma and they will die. But they have this strange effect that should plasma from like humanity's plasma weaponry, should it hit an exposed part of their body and it's just one shot from, let's say, a plasma pistol, a low yield plasma pistol, their skin can actually tank the energy and it dissipates across their entire skin. There might be a little bit of burning there, but it's not going to be literally vaporized because it came into contact with fucking plasma. That being said, it's not capable of withstanding multiple hits. But needless to say, in a tight situation, the fact that they can tank a plasma shot if they absolutely have to, pretty fucking useful if you ask me. This does have an interesting side effect, however, and that is that the skin almost has this rubbery, stony, kind of clammy texture to it now. Needless to say, it detracts from the natural quote-unquote beauty of Cyratins, but some Cyratins say that it actually adds to their beauty as it further exemplifies the Cyratin form or some random shit like that. Let's be honest, Cyratins are weird. But so, they actually look almost synthetic. And I guess that's kind of what it is. Their skin is quite literally being modified and strengthened. So their skin is essentially synthetic. You can kind of think of it like the Fallout 4 Valentine. Like if Valentine was brand new, you know, it's like it looks like human skin, but you can kind of tell there's something off with it. You know, it's not quite right. It kind of looks kind of rubbery, you know, it's clearly not skin. And that's kind of what their skin looks like at this point. Needless to say, their augmentations are rather bizarre, but in overall, they're nearly on par with Cyratin Marines. Now, could they actually go toe-to-toe with a Cyratin Marine? Not likely. Simply due to the fact that they're not as strong as a Cyratin Marine. They're not as durable as a Cyratin Marine. But that being said, on the battlefield, especially if they're in their full war gear and they have their weapons, their hell rifles and cannons with them, they're basically on equal footing with Cyratin Marines. If you're fighting unarmored, you're going to die. But if you're fighting fully equipped, chances are Cyratin Royal Vanguard will actually, usually, not always, win against Cyratin Marines. Now, I had said before that in order to be a part of the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, you had to be a member of the one of the Kier families. The reasoning for this is because it's a big commitment. The majority of these Kier families, generation after generation, they're constantly venerating the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. As a result, the majority of their family's offspring ends up joining the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. As a result, if you have a few odd ducks that decide not to join, it's really not that much of a loss when essentially 80 to 85% of the entire family's offspring end up joining the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. Once again, I'll take those odds. But it's not really available to anybody else. You know, there can't be a random family on the street that suddenly decides, I want my child to have the augmentations of the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. Because the fact of the matter is that the child most likely isn't going to join the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. They're probably going to have some other interests simply because they're not in the same environment as the Kier families, who, once again, venerate the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. That being said, when I say that it's only Kier families that are in the Cyratin Royal Vanguard, I'm specifically talking about the soldiers. There are plenty of other positions within the Royal Vanguard that need filling, and as a result, these ranks are specifically opened up to the wider Cyratin Empire. Should you decide that you want to protect Ostengrad in the best way possible as a member of the Royal Vanguard, that is available to you, such as things like aids and even crew and staff aboard various different void ships as well as within Ostengrad itself. In fact, these positions are considered to be just as prestigious as soldiers. The soldiers will always have the most prestige, the most valor, because they are the Kier families. You know, they are Cyratin nobles. But that's not to say that you can't be as honorable or as prestigious as them. The fact of the matter is that you can, being various different aids and assistants to the soldiers. Not only that, but if you're actually working within Ostengrad itself and you are given the honor of it, you may even be chosen to work within Ostengrad's central command nexus. At which point, that's like the only position that is considered more honorable and more prestigious than being a soldier of the Royal Vanguard itself. As a result, there are a lot of various different people. And not only this, but there are even like commanding officers within the Royal Vanguard. Some of them are straight up not even like Royal Vanguard soldiers. They're just random people from the Cyratin Empire that decided, I have the balls to be on the same battlefield as these badass dudes and these badass men and women, and as a result, you are probably going to become a military officer. That's not to say that Cyratin Royal Vanguard soldiers can't become officers themselves, but it's usually not the soldiers themselves that hold those types of positions. So, as a result, it's almost 45 minutes. I don't think we're going to have time to do the Cyratin Royal Fleet. So I think we're going to cut the episode here. There's probably some more information that I'm forgetting right off the top of my head right now, but that's pretty much the core gist of the Cyratin Royal Vanguard. And I don't feel like pushing this way over an hour. So Unfortunately, we're going to cut the episode early today. That being said, in the next episode, we'll be covering the Cyratin Royal Fleet as well as another topic, simply because there is significantly less on the Cyratin Royal Fleet. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys are looking forward to Wednesday and Friday's Surviving Mars episodes, as well as Saturday and Sunday at noon Central Standard Time, where we're having our live streams of RimWorld on Saturday and Sunday Night Live, where I pick a random game and we game it out. Not only this, but I'm actually going to start doing this at the ends of videos. I want to remind everybody that we do have a community Discord. You can go to the channel's description, and in the description you can find a link to the Discord, as well as, I believe, in the description of each video. So until then, guys, see ya.